Okay, I think we're ready to go. This is the 315 presentation, Accessible Navigation from Scratch. This is Adam Berkowitz.
Hi.
Take it away, Adam.
Hi, okay, so welcome and thank you all for being here. This is really nice. I'm coming here from the University of Connecticut, the Office of University Communications, where we have a in-house, it's kind of like an in-house ad firm, and we have 2 web developers and 2 web designers, and I'm one of the web developers. And this presentation actually comes out of a conference very similar to this that got held at UConn a few years ago. And after the presentation, we started looking at our websites, and they had some issues that we wanted to address. And one of those issues was that the navigation on the sites was very broken unless you were able to use them under a very particular set of circumstances. So, and I'm talking about like on desktop. So you needed to have JavaScript available. You really needed to be able to use a mouse. It was really like there were some very particular problems. And we looked at these navigation elements that we had, these top-level navigation elements, and we started thinking about sort of what we could do to fix them. Now, so this presentation comes out of that, but I'm going to tell you that I'm not exactly like a web accessibility expert. It's not my full-time job is doing web accessibility. I just sort of do the best I can as I go. My background is in music and performance and education, so I sometimes think about things maybe a little bit differently than other web developers. And so the other caveat you should know is that this is based on the needs that we had at UConn, right? This was like a very particular set of things, but I think that the principles largely apply to building out structures on the web regardless. So I wanted to take a quick look at what I thought might be somebody who's well-intentioned, but maybe not really familiar with how browsers interpret what we code and the impacts that they have on accessibility. So here, this developer has made a navigation element. They put it nicely in a semantic nav tag, and it's got a list item and a link, and then a submenu of things under it. They styled it, right? They styled it so that the submenu is hidden, and then when you hover over the element, it shows up. But there's some issues with this. There's some problems with the way this works. Does anybody offhand maybe recognize some of the problems it has? Anything at all? Yeah? Yeah, so display none hides everything from screen readers. It hides not only things visually, but and all their descendants, so all the things under it, but then you can't, screen readers aren't going to find them, ever. Anything else? Yeah?
There's an anchor tag without an href.
Yeah, there's an anchor tag without an href, so what does that do?
So there's no link without the href.
Yep, there's no link without the href, so maybe the intention here is to toggle somehow by clicking.
Right, so maybe there should be a role or something.
Yeah, so maybe there should be a role, absolutely. An interesting thing about anchor tags, though, is that without that href, you can't tab onto them with a keyboard. So the thing that makes the anchor tag tabbable is the href. Otherwise, the browser just says, I don't know, this is something that's nice with some text in it. Thank you. I'll display it. Good. Anything else? Yeah? Only works with a mouse. So because that thing is not tabbable, and because we haven't added any focus styles for it, you'll never, ever, ever be able to get to that submenu if you can't use a mouse for some reason. So these were some of the things that I was thinking about when I started this project of thinking about, like, how could we do a little bit better than this? And the main thing is that people need to be able to use websites, right? I mean, I don't think that if you're here, that's a really controversial statement. People need to be able to use websites. And if you're going to put up a website and it's going to have more than one page, and I'm not talking about a single page application like Rachel was discussing this morning, I'm literally talking about one page, and even then maybe not, it's going to need some navigation. You're going to need people to be able to get from one part of the site to another. And we can't necessarily depend on people doing what we expect. So as web developers and web designers, we know not to, We know not to just take any user input for granted, right? You fill out a form and you want to validate that the information in that form isn't going to destroy your database, right? Like, that makes sense. That's a good idea. We can't anticipate what people are going to put in the form beforehand, but we can make sure that what they put in the form is safe for us. Well, the same thing applies to navigation. We can't or websites in general, really. We can't necessarily anticipate how people will use those websites. We can't anticipate if they're going to use them with a mouse or a keyboard or some other assistive technology. We can't necessarily decide in advance if they're going to be used on a train or a plane or in a car or on a phone or on a desktop, a laptop, an iPad. We don't know. So we have to do the best we can to give people the opportunity to use websites in ways that are meaningful. So what does that mean in this context? Oh no, hey, there we go. See, I'm giving it away. There we go. I had my things out of order. Oh, that's terrible. That's a bad presentation. So what does this mean in the context of the nav menu? So I didn't come up with this. Poor, but as you can see now, perceivable, operable, understandable, robust. So what does this mean? In the context of a navigation menu, if there is a navigation to be seen, please make sure that people can actually see it. If there are elements that need to be hidden, make sure that they can actually see them at the appropriate time. Operable. So please make sure that the things that are on your website can be used, in fact, by a variety of means, not just the ones that you necessarily expect. Understandable. The menu, the thing that the person is using, should behave in a predictable manner. So when I click on something, it should behave predictably for me. It should open or close something. It should take me somewhere. It shouldn't do some random thing that I don't understand. It should be an understandable part of the interface. And robust. So robust in our case, we get most of our sites are built on WordPress, which is server rendered. They're not single page applications, mostly. In this case, it means that we wanted to make sure that if JavaScript wasn't available for our users, that they would still have a very similar experience using our websites than those users who choose to have JavaScript available. Because that's another thing that you can't necessarily predict. So what are the tools that we have to accomplish this? Well, one is HTML. The fundamental building blocks of what the browser understands are tags. I mean, HTML has been around a really long time. Browsers are pretty good by now at understanding what it's supposed to do. And I think that it's important that if you want to build something that is accessible and inclusive, that you start with these fundamental building blocks. I think that if you skip ahead to some other point in the design future and make decisions based on that, and then try to work back, you may run yourself into trouble. So, aside from using the nav element to wrap the whole menu around, right? What are some things that we can do? So in some ways, creating a menu is really pretty straightforward because it's just a list of items. We wrap it in an unordered list, and then we item, maybe a submenu, sub-item, sub-item, sub-item. It's the same basic pattern over and over and over again. And there's going to be some, links or whatever to take you to the different places, and that's fine. But there are two things that we need to have in order to create that list. One is we need to have a data source. We need to know what should be there. The second thing is that we're going to need to have two functions to interpret that data source and put them onto the page. Now I say two functions, and if you're not a developer in the room, please don't get, worried about this. All I mean here is we need some way of making determinations about what is the item, what should be in it, what should be associated with it, how should it get onto the page. And you can, whether or not you're doing this programmatically or you're doing this by literally writing the HTML by hand, it's the same process. You need to read the item, you need to understand what it is, and then you need to assess it and create markup for it. So this could be almost anything. It could be like WordPress objects for each item. It could be a JSON API, a JSON response that gives you some amount of data. And then you go through and you say, okay, do I have readable text here? Is there a title? Is there something that's supposed to go there? Do I have a URL or a link? Do I have neither of those things? And what does that mean? What is that supposed to tell me? Are there some submenu items associated with this thing? Yes, no, maybe. What is the shape of those? How should those get onto the page? So that's how you're going to go through and organize the structure in HTML about what the shape of the menu is going to be before you start styling it, before you get to anything else. Finding the items and deciding what they should be. And again, it doesn't really matter what language you use to do this. You can do a PHP, JavaScript, Ruby, whatever you want. You can, like I said, you can write it by hand. All that matters is that these things are consistent. So in our case, we had three cases that we had to deal with. We had to deal with plain links, and we had to do with two kinds of submenus. One where there was a top-level landing page. So that's like, I have an About Us page that is literally a page. Sorry, I'm getting weird feedback from here. About Us page is literally a page, and then maybe some submenu items under it. Or maybe the button itself, the thing at the top is just like a toggle that opens things up and down. So we had three cases. And I think that these are fairly typical nav menu cases because either you want to go somewhere or you want to do something, right? You want to open and close something. So if that's true, then what do we want? So we want our markup to facilitate making a menu that is poor, perceivable, operable, understandable, robust. And we need to be able to tell the difference between each of the choices. So one thing that I thought a lot about was the need to have links and buttons. So links are things that in markup, they take us somewhere. They go to a place, a different page, a different part of the page, whatever. A button is an actionable thing. It is a thing that the user can press on or click or focus on or whatever, and then an action happens. As we saw earlier, links without an href value are not actually, they don't do anything. I mean, they're not tabbable, they're just nice to have. They're the same as paragraph tags. But if you have like a link that you say, okay, well this link is going to be like a button, it will be the thing that toggles, and it's not going to take somebody somewhere else. Well, the concern here is that then you need JavaScript to override the default action of the link and make it do a thing that it doesn't really want to do. So then we go back to, okay, but now my user doesn't have JavaScript, so what happens? Like, what's the effect of that? So buttons will create an interactive feature that will actually do something, and a screen reader will be able to interpret and understand the difference between these two elements. It'll tell you, oh, you're on a link now, you're on a button now. So it's also helpful to have icons in a menu that'll indicate the state of the menu somehow. A thing is open or closed. A thing is visible, not visible. It's just a nice little design feature. You could also consider ARIA attributes. So ARIA attributes are now widely used part of the HTML specification. They work very nicely, and they help us do things like indicate to screen readers like that there's additional text to something that's visually hidden, but is important for somebody who perhaps can't see to know about, that some other action can be taken. And I'll show you this in a moment. There's also things like ARIA expanded, or I forget what that one does, but there are ways of like associating things, or like telling a screen reader, this thing is open, this thing is closed. So that even though the person can't necessarily see the interface, they have an idea of the state of the interface. Data attributes are helpful. Data attributes are helpful when it comes to both styling and JavaScript, because they give CSS an additional piece of information to work with. They can, and they give JavaScript also like something to target, and you can change the data attribute to suit your needs. And again, we wanted to support people who don't use JavaScript. So let's see how this HTML, just see how this markup appears in some code. So this is just the markup for one single link, right? It's wrapped in a nav element, and it's part of an unordered list, and it'll get you home. That's all it does. It's a humble link. But I'd like you to please take note of a few things. One is that in this particular menu, I've scoped, I've namespaced the nav element, the unordered list, the items with an AM dash prefix for like the IDs, the classes, that kind of thing. And that really, really helps when it comes to styling and JavaScript. So I can say, style that thing right there. Don't confuse it with somebody else, right? I want my main accessible navigation thing to be very specifically tailored to the experience that I want to give people. Note also, please, that there's a Node.js class on my list element. The Node.js class will be there if there's Node.js. And then I can style specifically for that class. I could say, oh, if there's no JavaScript, please give me these things. If there is, ignore them. When JavaScript comes around and I say, oh, the JavaScript has loaded correctly, it can remove the Node.js class. It's gone. And then those styles don't take effect, and CSS doesn't care. Here's a linked item. Here's a linked item with a submenu. So in this case, we want the top level thing to be a link, right? We want people to be able to click on it and go to a place, but we also need a submenu. So here we have, again, an ID, Node.js classes, but now we're starting to get into some data attributes. So the data attributes, does this thing have children? Yes, it does. It has like a submenu, children. It has an ARIA label that tells somebody with a screen reader that, oh, not only can you visit me at this link, but if you go to the next thing, that's going to reveal some more stuff to you. You can tab over to the next button. There's a button there, I promise. And if you click on it or open it somehow, you will get more information. That button then has a bunch of other ARIA attributes, right? So ARIA expanded, ARIA has pop-up. So it has a pop-up menu. So the button now says to the screen reader, oh, not only am I a button, but there's something else here that's going to happen, right, when you click on this thing. How do I know? ARIA owns list 1. And then my submenu has an ID of list 1. The little span inside of the button, right, because in this case, I don't want any text there, is going to be the visual indicator. And I'll show you how it comes from data before in a minute. But that little caret V thing, that's going to be the little visual indicator for the button. And I hide it from screen readers so that I make sure that there's no confusion about like the intent of that span. It's just gone. The screen reader doesn't need to know about that. I give the button an ARIA label, and we're set with as far as that goes. And here is a submenu that, oops, where did I go? Here's a submenu where the top level thing is just a button itself. So I can click on the button, I can focus on the button, I can do something with the button, and the submenu will open. These are the 3 cases that we needed to deal with. Links by themselves, links that go off to a page that still have a submenu under them, and submenus by themselves. So when we think about structuring out the markup, this was what I was considering. Are there any questions about, I know maybe some of these ARIA things are maybe not so familiar, but is there any question about markup stuff?
This may be slightly off topic, but we're talking about buttons and links, and so
Yes.
you're basically saying that if you're using an anchor tag, so if I were to use an anchor tag and then define the role as a button, that is not a good best practice.
So the question is that if you use an anchor tag and then define the role as a button, is that a good practice or not? That's a good question. I would only say, I'd say it like this. If it's going to break other stuff in your site, go in that direction. If you're starting from scratch, then I would say there's no really solid reason, in my thinking, to do that. Does that make sense? Because
Yeah, we're solving an issue, yes.
yeah. So like if it's gonna break your styling and it's gonna be like 6 months to figure it out, or it's gonna be like your JavaScript is dependent on it, or you can't fix the output that's coming from, right? Like some of these kinds of issues. And believe me, I run into my share of these problems. We have legacy sites where I'm just like, I don't know what we're doing here. Go for it, do it. Because better that you put it there than it take you forever to fix. Yeah? Any other quick questions about markup before we move on? Yes?
I was just going to add to that, for the role equals button, for a screen reader user, a button should work with enter or spacebar, but a link only natively works with enter.
Cool.
So if you assign role equals button, then you have to add the spacebar functionality.
See, I didn't know
I
that.
knew there would be an issue, and I didn't want there to be one. Thank you.
But you know what? But we also do the best we can.
Yeah.
And this is not at all a perfect science. And sometimes we have to deal with the things that are given to us as opposed to ideal situations. So how are we going to support this with JavaScript at CSS at this point? Because the markup that we have is more accessible, but it doesn't look like anything. I mean, if you've ever, I'm sure you've all seen just like a browser rendered list. It's fairly terrible. So we want it to look nice. Our designers want it to look nice. Our people visiting the site want it to look nice and function well. So I'll tell you a little bit about what we did. I'm not going to tell you everything because that would take too long. But let me just start by saying that one thing that we can do as developers and designers is to set a low bar of entry for other developers and designers. Because if we make the barrier of entry to putting an accessible thing on our site or fixing it too high, then people coming in to the field early on are going to be like, no, I don't want to deal with that. I don't want to fix that. That's too hard for me. So we want to set sort of a low barrier of entry. A few things to help. Again, scoping the CSS, scoping the styles. Use as few styles as possible to get it working, and then add separate styles to make it look pretty. Use as few class names as possible. We can avoid things like none display block, like we saw from the person before. All of these things are going to help not only the people visiting your sites, but the designers and developers who need to maintain and build them. So let me show you a quick little thing about display. Because submenus often get hidden, right? The whole point of a submenu is that I shouldn't see it until I need it. So this is a little tiny, just a small little thing about hiding and showing things. Because sometimes we really want to hide things and show them, all right? So it's okay to take things out of the document flow. It's okay to make them not available to screen readers. It's okay to make them available to screen. All of these things are okay. But I think that it's worth knowing and worth understanding and worth exploring what the effects of these things are. If I set display none, display block, what does that do? If I set opacity 0, what does that do? And there are very practical implications to this. So here's display none, display block. So there's display none, display block, and there's visibility hidden and visible. The one on the left is accessible, and the one on the right is accessible. So why should I know or care what the difference is? Let's say that the person visiting your site for some reason doesn't have good motor control. And they need to use a mouse for some reason, but they don't have good motor control. And they need to hover over your menu in order to see it. Well, as soon as they leave the About Us little menu thing, right, it becomes very hard to get back. So if the pointer is shaking, like they're on an airplane or something, I don't know what the situation is, right? Like, I'm just a developer, I don't know. But if the pointer is shaking for some reason and they leave the thing, the whole menu disappears immediately. With visibility hidden, visibility visible, and some opacity settings, we can give a little delay. So that if the mouse leaves for a moment and it comes back, the user can still use the submenu. So let's talk a little bit about the data elements and switching some things. And I'm sorry if you're not familiar with the syntax. I sort of had to fit everything onto the page. So this is, I promise you, this is still CSS. This is Sass. If you're not familiar with this, I'm sorry, but I had to get everything into the slide. But let's walk through this for a moment. So here we say, okay, I have a list element. There's somewhere in there, there's a span. And make sure that somewhere in there, the before element is going to have, the content of that before element is going to be the data attribute from that span. CSS can actually read the data attribute from the span, data before, I tell it which one, and when I hover over the list element, the content changes. So why do I need to do this? Because CSS is actually terrible at reading the things that are in between the tags. CSS is good at styling the tags themselves, and we think that it's good at like styling like a div or a paragraph or whatever, but it's not actually good at that. It's styling at the tag things, as far as I can tell. And it's styling before and after elements, okay? So it's no good at understanding what we should do with this. But then, okay, well, why don't I just use JavaScript to flip these over? Well, because JavaScript doesn't know anything about before and after because they're not part of the document. They don't exist for JavaScript. They're a real hassle. as far as I can tell, maybe somebody here will tell me I'm wrong, but as far as I can tell, JavaScript is terrible at this. So now we can use these plain text characters and associate them with these, and we can substitute them later if we want, but at least we'll get something, some kind of visual state going. So now let's take a look at, now let's take a quick look at, opening and closing the submenu. Sorry, I had a little thing there for a second. Boy. Okay, so our user doesn't have JavaScript. The person visiting our site doesn't, for whatever reason, it broke. I don't know. Something happened. No problem. They can still open and close their submenu with this really cool focus within property. Anybody heard of this before? I hope. Maybe? Yes. Good. Cool. I see heads nodding in places. Focus within is really neat. I'm going to actually read what the documentation for Focus In says, because from MDN, the Mozilla Developer Network, because I will otherwise mess this up. So, Focus Within is a pseudo class that represents an element that has received focus or contains an element that has received focus. In other words, it represents an element that is itself matched by the focus pseudo class or has a descendant that is matched by focus. Clear enough? Okay, so no is the answer to that. So basically what it means is when let's say I have that submenu thing, and it's hidden right now, and I focus on the button. Let's say I don't have JavaScript to open the button or the link or whatever it is. When I focus on it, the submenu will appear because it is part of the descendant of that thing. So long as I have a focusable element that wraps my interior list, the interior list will be exposed once I focus on the containing element. How's that? So what does that look like? Looks like this. Here's the same little example from before. And note how focus within, the things go, and I promise these are the same. But on the no focus within one, nothing happens. It goes straight across. See now? So that's pretty cool, right? Problem solved. Presentation's done. Thanks. So I'm glad you like it. So, okay. So not quite. Here's actually a practical example. This is live right now from UConn Stanford. We have a bunch of menus like this. I picked this one, but you can see that I can go through all of my elements. Well, there's a little bit of an issue with this, which is, yeah.
I was just going to ask, why was it also popping to the arrow
Yeah, that's what I meant.
along with the?
Oh, yeah, good, because yes, thank you. So the arrow is the button, right? And the about thing is the link. So there's actually an about page there, right? And then the link is a separate thing. One thing you should know is this is not what the menu I designed looks like from scratch, right? Like that would be useless. So the menu itself, the styles are a skeleton. They just make it sort of like straight across with like some stuff hidden. The whole point of creating a logic around the styling is to make it so that we can make it look like whatever we need to make it look like. Yeah.
It's okay if you don't remember the exact keyboard functionality, but say we're going through kind of the top items.
Yep.
Do you know if, I'm trying to think like tab versus maybe arrow. Maybe, do you remember if there's a way to just kind of navigate the top items without going down?
There you go. See, now that's the problem with focus within.
Okay.
You can't. So how do we fix that? So we fix it with JavaScript. Finally, we got there. Excellent. So focus within is pretty good, right? But as we've had pointed out to us, that's a lot of menu things to. Oh no, I have to go back. That's not going to help. It also doesn't let us do things like ARIA expanded. CSS doesn't know anything about switching the states of our application. Like, it just can't do that. Shouldn't do that. And so how can we help developers, again, with JavaScript? One is by keeping the API as developers. We can keep it tiny, keeping a low barrier to entry. So this thing comes with some JavaScript. It creates a new navigation thing that has exactly one public method to it. The rest are all hidden away nicely. And it takes exactly maximum of 2 argument properties. I tell it which menu I want to attach the JavaScript to, and I tell it whether or not it's going to be a clicky kind of menu, click, 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 or a hovering kind of menu. Click, yes, no, false, true. So what does that chain of events looks like? It looks like this. So when I set the init method on the JavaScript, on the new navigation thing, it sets off these 4 things that are basically hidden from some random developer, but are available that we could edit. It sets event listeners, right? First of all, it defines which menu we're going to do, like we said. Then we set some event listeners. Which events? Mouse over, mouse down, keyboard events, and so on. And they get attached. And then that gets routed to a dispatcher and make sure, oh, like I got a mouse over event. Like, I know what to do with that, send it over there. I got a focus event, send it over there. I'm gonna handle the events. So what does that look like? Well, here's one focus event. So this is how we manage some of this question of like, okay, can we let the user just go across back and forth? This is not literally the code that gets used. Yeah, this is like sort of an example, but this should give you an idea. We allow these things to happen, that if the user leaves the menu, we get rid of all of the submenus. That's helpful to know. Otherwise, we can open and close them. We can attach different kinds of properties to the elements. We can make the icons switch. So what does that look like? That looks like this. So now we can see that we can traverse the top level ones, find the one we want, go down, go back up, and so on. Sorry, it's a thing, it goes on. Okay? But now this helps us with the JavaScript. So now we've got, like, if for some reason styles fail and JavaScript fail, like if everything fails except for the markup, well, if everything fails except for the markup, at least we have a list of things. If the styles fail, if the JavaScript fails, we've got some backup there, right? At least it still looks pretty. And it still sort of functions in the way that we want. Oh, I remember. This is important. Focus Within is not available on Microsoft browsers. This will come as no shock. This will come as no shock to any of the developers in the room. So Microsoft Focus Within is not available on those. But it is going to be available in the upcoming versions of Edge based on Chromium, whenever that gets released and whenever anybody decides to adopt it. Okay? So in our case, it was okay. We've only got about 15% of people coming to our sites using a Microsoft browser, and I decided that of the tiny, tiny portion that were going to use a Microsoft browser and not have JavaScript available, we were going to let it slide. Because I just, I can't do everything, okay? So, moving ahead, we've got, a bunch of stuff to do. I just keep trying to learn stuff. I keep trying to talk to people and find out things. This whole thing is an open source project. You can visit it, contribute if you want, submit issues. You can see this on a bunch of our websites. I've got a bunch of different things going on with this. So, yeah. We've got some time for questions, please. What else who has questions about things related to this, I hope? Anybody? Really? Wow. Yes?
Are you planning to build any other kinds of parts of the page, like just
So am I planning to build a menu that is, I'm sorry.
So this is kind of like a typical menu, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's sort of principles for any menu that you might design. Like, you don't have to do it the way I did it. Right?
So are you the user plan to implement any other parts of the page, like the body of the page, like where somebody can pass a JSON with the paragraph or whatever, and then all the web accessible version of that?
Oh, yeah, so the question is, am I planning to build out more kinds of things like this so that they become accessible? So a lot of our sites, as I perhaps mentioned before, are built on top of WordPress, and we use a page builder to handle a lot of those just because of, I mean, there's only 2 developers and 2 designers. When we do have applications that need, parsing from from a REST API or something like that, absolutely. We make sure that the responses that come back are templated in an accessible way. I don't necessarily make them an open source project. Sometimes they're very specific to the needs of that particular thing, but yes, is the answer. When we get data, we're making sure that we are testing it for keyboard accessibility, we're testing it for, as best we can, for screen reader accessibility, we are testing it for a whole bunch of things. And yeah, so for sure. Absolutely. Yes?
I'm curious if your experience with, well, I saw that in JavaScript you had, is this a hovery one or a clicky one? It looks like the kind of the top level link and then the expand, they are separate.
Yes.
And I wonder, I know when designers try to kind of combine them into one,
Yes.
it could get a little messy. I was wondering if you had any experience with that.
Yeah, so, okay. So the question is, in terms of design, when you have this thing where there's like a link and then a button next to it, and your designer gets mad because they don't look like one thing. Okay, so when JavaScript is available and somebody's using a mouse to click on one of these, the whole list item is styled as a block. What I didn't talk about here is one particular thing, and we can discuss it later. I set a custom JavaScript event on the menu to detect links, to detect which particular top level thing should get the style. What is the current top level item? And then we can style that current top level item.
Okay, so the hover click was more of a response to the event, not like a type of application.
Yeah, no, and it's also like how should the user interact with how should the user be able to interact with the menu? Should I expect that the user is going to go to the menu item and be able to hover over it and navigate it just by hovering, or should they need to click on a thing and then thereby, yeah. Anybody else? Yes?
How do you handle local with the same markup?
How do we handle mobile? Do we use the same markup? So no, we actually, for a bunch of our sites, we are using a separate mobile thing and hiding it until it's needed. We hide it from screen readers, we hide it visually, it's just gone. There is actually one site that's coming up where it is going to be the same markup. And it's a very new implementation, we haven't finished it yet, but it will be all the same with one element that gets hidden or shown, depending. Yeah. Anybody else?
What's this WordPress plugin?
What's the WordPress plugin? Okay, so I don't know. so I can tell you. So if you want to use this thing if you're familiar with how WordPress works and PHP and all of that stuff, you can you can use this thing as a composer package. And you can instantiate your own custom walker that I have built in order to do this. Building it as a plugin itself, and the custom walker, you can, from that package, it also brings in the JavaScript and CSS. I have a thing that'll show you how to do it. We can talk about that. The plugin, I just haven't had time. We're doing a lot of stuff, and I just, Anybody else before I get booted from? Okay, well, thank you all very much for coming. And thanks to the Business School for having me.
The link to the slides and the feedback are on the schedule. So visit that, please. It's 4 o'clock. The next session